Legitimization Part 2. By the mid-16th century, however, the notion of the Sultan personally leading his armies to victory was an anachronism. The huge extension of the empire's boundaries between 1517 and 1540 meant that it was no longer possible to add vast territories to the empire in a single year's campaigning. Warfare instead became prolonged with no spectacular conquests, and requiring the army for years in succession to overwinter near the front. 37 At the same time, the increase in the empire's size added to the complexity of its administration. In these circumstances, the removal of the Sultan from the capital for the whole length of a campaign became impossible, and, from the reign of Selim II, the Sultans rarely took to the field with their army. This change in circumstances also coincided with a change in the character of the Sultans. Before Suleiman I, Bayezid II had been an exception in possessing a pacific temperament. After Suleiman, few sultans had a taste for warfare. Nonetheless, the notion of the Sultan as a warrior persisted. In 1596, after 3 years of unsuccessful warfare against the Habsburgs, Mehmed III, at the instigation of the Janissaries, the Grand Vizier and his father's tutor, Saad-ad-Din, accompanied the army to Hungary. Under the nominal command of the Sultan, the Ottoman troops captured Eger, and, at the Battle of Mezocharestes, snatched victory from defeat. Mehmed, however, refused to lead another campaign, and the war continued for another 10 years. The last spasm of the tradition of warrior sultans came with the reigns of Osman II, who led an unsuccessful campaign against Poland in 1621, and Murad IV, whose reconquests of Yerevan in 1635 and Baghdad in 1638 gave him a place in Ottoman tradition as the last sultan who in person led his troops to victory. Both Osman's and Murad's campaigns came at a time when the Ottoman elite were aware of a need to reform and renew the institutions of the empire, and, within this context, they were an attempt to re-establish the old tradition of the Sultan as war leader. Within a polity that existed to wage war, the Sultan's role as a leader in war was in itself enough to legitimize his rule. War, however, also bestowed a religious legitimacy. In Islamic law, holy war against the infidels is an obligation on the Muslim community, and, in their battles against Christian enemies, the sultans could portray themselves as fulfilling God's law. 38 It became customary in this context to refer to the sultans in particular, and to their troops in general, as ghazis, a word which has an everyday sense of warrior or raider and apas, but which, when Islamic jurists and historians adopted it as one of the terms for a person engaged in holy war, also acquired the sense of holy warrior apostrophe. 39 The notion of the sultan as a ghazi was particularly effective as a legitimizing device, since epic accounts of heroic deeds against the infidels also formed a strand in popular Muslim culture, and books of holy war constituted a branch of popular literature. The ghazi, therefore, is a figure who appears both in learned works and in popular entertainments. In consequence, by adopting ghazi and apas as a title, the sultans could appeal to a wide spectrum of their Muslim followers. It seems likely that the Ottoman rulers adopted this title during the 14th century, following the example of earlier Muslim sovereigns, but clear evidence is lacking. The earliest certain reference to this claim is in the work of the poet and moralist Ahmedi, who, in his brief verse history of about 1400, presents the Ottoman kings and their followers as holy warriors, and prefaces the passage with a description of the qualities of a ghazi. In later chronicles, these virtues adhere almost exclusively to the person of the Sultan. By the late 15th century, in the words of the chronicler, Neshri, the Ottoman sultans had become the preeminent ghazis. After the apostle of God, Muhammad, and the four rightly guided caliphs and apas. This was an idea which was to linger until the end of the empire, even when the sultans had withdrawn from leadership in war. In the last years of the empire it enjoyed a revival, when, following Osman Pasha's heroic defense of Pleven in 1876, Sultan Abdul Hamid II, 1876-1909, added the word the ghazi to his imperial cipher, which appeared at the head of documents, on coins, and in public places. The idea of the Sultan as a ghazi had two functions. Firstly, it justified the Sultan's wars against Christians as the fulfillment of God's command. Secondly, it justified the Sultan's possession of former Christian territories. Land which Muslims take from infidels passes, in law, into the dominion of the Muslim sovereign. The Sultans were, therefore, legitimate rulers of land which they had taken from Christians. This presents an obvious problem. The Ottomans fought against Muslims as often as they did against Christians, and conquered as much Muslim as Christian territory. To justify war against Muslims, Ottoman chroniclers in the 15th century presented the Muslim adversaries of the Ottomans, for example, the Karamanids, as hindering the holy war. In about 1460, the historian Shukrullah depicted Murad I as consulting with the ulama and acquiring a religious sanction to attack his Muslim neighbors, because these were planning to attack him from the east, while he pursued the holy war in the west. An anonymous chronicle of 1485 explained how the Sultan's Muslim neighbors incited the infidels against the Ottomans and then, when they were preoccupied, seized the opportunity to attack from the other side and oppose. In the 16th century, Ottoman propaganda changed. Throughout this century, and into the 17th, the Sultan's most powerful Muslim opponents were the Safavids of Iran. The Safavid Shahs, unlike the Ottoman sultans, were Shiites, and, most significantly, claimed quasi-divine status as heads of the Safavid religious order. These heterodox claims allowed the Ottomans to present the Safavids as rebels against the legitimate authority of the Ottoman sultans and, more importantly, as apostates and infidels. The Safavids, the Ottoman chief mufti, Abu Su'ud declared in 1548, were rebels and, from many points of view, infidels and apos. This statement allowed Abu Su'ud, like his predecessors and followers, to rule that war against the Safavids was legitimate holy war. So appalling, in fact, was Safavid heresy that fighting against these is more important than fighting the infidels and apos. These were the justifications for waging war against Muslims. A further justification, not so much for waging war as for acquiring Muslim territory, was to emerge in the late 15th century. The most important and the longest-lived dynasty in pre-Ottoman Anatolia had been the Seljuks of Rum, who had ruled in central Anatolia for much of the 12th and 13th centuries. The dynasty had become extinct shortly after 1300. A series of legends in the earliest Ottoman chronicles tell how a Seljuk sultan called Aladdin had granted lands in Sogvut on the Byzantine frontier to Osman's father, and how the same sultan had bestowed on Osman a horsetail standard, drum and robe of honor as symbols of investiture. The purpose of these tales was clearly to give the Ottomans legitimacy by linking them to the Seljuks. The stories reached their definitive form in 1485, in Neshri's History of the Ottomans and Apos. In Neshri's version, it was Aladdin I.D. 1237, who granted land to Osman's father, and Aladdin III.D. 1303, who sent the standard drum and robe to Osman and, being childless himself, appointed Osman as his successor. This last development of the story made the Ottomans the legal successors to the Seljuks, and therefore rightful heirs to Seljuk territory in Anatolia. An obvious corollary to this was that the dynasties that had established themselves in the old Seljuk realms were mere usurpers of land which, by right, belonged to the Ottomans. Warfare against them and seizure of their territory was, therefore, legitimate. Ottoman historiography down to the 20th century was to enshrine Neshri's story of the Seljuk inheritance. These elements in Ottoman propaganda and mythology legitimized warfare and the acquisition of territory in East and West. However, the claims of the Sultan to rulership as members of a particular family required a further justification. This the Ottoman genealogy provided. 40 The Ottoman family tree seems to have originated early in the reign of Murad II, 1421-51, at a time when the Ottomans felt the need to reassert their claims to rulership after the defeat by Timur and the Civil War. The key figure in the creation of this genealogy was Yazigiolu Ali, whom Murad seems to have employed in his chancellery in the 1420s. Yazigiolu found the materials in the legends of Oghuz Khan, the mythical ancestor of the Western Turks. Oghuz Khan, in this tradition, was the grandson of Noah through Japheth and had 6 sons and 24 grandsons, who were ancestors of the legendary 24 tribes of the Western Turks. Yazigiolu traced the Ottoman line through the senior son and senior grandson of Oghuz Khan, so giving the Ottoman sultans a hereditary primacy among Turkish monarchs. He reinforced this message with a tale of how, on the collapse of the Seljuk dynasty, the Turkish rulers of Anatolia elected Osman as their overlord on grounds of his descent. Yazigiolu, in fact, based his genealogy on a version of the Oghuz legends which appears in a universal history, which the chronicler and statesman, Rashid al-Din, composed for the Ilkhanid ruler, Ghazan Khan, 1295-1304. This names the grandson, from whom the Ottoman house descended as K.E. Other versions of the genealogy grew up during the course of the 15th century, but all make the Ottomans descend from the senior son of Oghuz Khan.